Hi, I'm Jon Sicotte, Executive Editor of the Brewer Magazine. Welcome to another edition of the Brewer Magazine podcast. And every November and December, our print issue includes the Expert Outlook for the coming year. So that means Expert Outlook 2025 is going to be on the way. I'm in the middle of doing interviews right now, and thank you to so many that have stepped up to be able to talk about what your plans are for 2025 and beyond, and some of the issues that are affecting the craft brewing industry as they go. There's quite a few of them to talk about. Well, we are going to do one of them as a podcast. And we're joined today with Larry Horwitz, the Director of Brewing Operations at Crooked Hammock. And hello, Larry. How are you?
Good, John. How you been, man?
Very good. Enjoying the fall weather that has finally bestowed Ohio. You don't miss that at all, do you?
I will tell you that as a native Ohioan, I like a season, and I especially like fall. It's my favorite season. So where I live right now in Lower Delaware has pretty similar weather. The biggest change is that the ocean softens the heat, and it also softens the cool. But every once in a while we get a little bit of a nor'easter that makes it feel like I'm back in the snow belt, right?
Yeah.
Usually for about 4 hours.
Well, I got my, it's not hot cocoa, but it's coffee because it's the morning still for me. But it's fall for sure today, and I'm enjoying it a little bit. I just am mad because now I can't have a fire because it rained last night. But we
have a fire prohibition right now. It's been too dry in Lower Delaware, so the state Department of Recreation is like, please don't burn down the state. No backyard fires. Which is a bummer because it's so gorgeous. Like it's, we're like mid 60s during the day and high 40s, low 50s at night, which it might, the Neanderthal in me is like, time for fire.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, fire and beer. I mean, that is one of the best combinations, is just to relax, let that beer kind of stay cool and kind of warm up a little bit. Like it's like the perfect cellaring temperature for a beer outside.
Exactly. Well, it's not going to warm up too fast, right? Like you can sip your way responsibly through those high alcohol imperial stouts and not have to worry about them losing their cool.
Exactly. Well, the topic today that's been scrolling across the bottom here is peer into the future. And of course, every year Brewer does the Expert Outlook. We love getting the thought processes of what's going to be happening. Obviously, breweries, the planning process begins so early. That's why we kind of wait until almost the end of the year to make sure that you guys have already had your plans set. And Crooked Hammock, I'm sure you guys have been talking 2025 for how long now? How long has it been that you guys started your 2025 thought process?
We actually start our 2025 planning process back in the spring of this year,
Sure.
right? So, I think that obviously we're a hospitality company, and I run the beverage program and the brewery for us, and it took a little while for the hospitality teams to understand the arc of time for that. But I'm like, think about it like, I mean, we make products out of agronomic products or agronomic raw goods, right? And barley and hops are harvested once a year. So that changes the arc of planning, right? And more importantly, I think, is that we know that the further out we plan, the better we execute. Yeah. And because we're not as small as we used to be in a good way. I joke, when you're a single tap room brewery, you can be really nimble and you can pivot quickly and you can try stuff next week that you didn't try this week or at least next month. But you get to be our size and we're closer to a battleship. It takes a lot or an iceberg. It takes a lot to change our direction. And if we're thorough and thoughtful ahead of time, then we do a better job. So we have our program pretty much together for 25. I mean, obviously, we're not going to miss business opportunities. If something presents, we can pivot. But we want to get, especially in the supply chain world we live in now, we want to get ourselves as tight as we can ahead of time so that we can make the best decisions early and make sure that we're shoring up the base to get what we need to get made and sold. So sorry, that was a very long way of saying, yes, we're mostly planning for 2025. I have a pretty good idea what I'm doing for the whole year and a little bit what we're doing at the beginning of 2026, because we are currently building 2 brewery restaurants. So
yeah, and I was going to say, what are you most excited about? And I'm sure physical space is one of them, but more personnel, different brands, just for you guys. I mean, what do you have coming in store for 25 that excites you the most, and why did you go that route?
So for 25, we've got a couple of things. So in 24, we made a portfolio shift, right? One of the reasons that I came to work here at Crooked Hammock is that they were hopeful to land a program that looked more like what our customers wanted and needed. And I think I bring a little tiny bit of experience on that issue, after 30 years of being in this business. And I'm a data guy, right? I love looking at the data. So we changed our program a bit. We kept some long-term winners for us and started making, premium lager beer, which still the number one selling style in the United States, and in my opinion, tap rooms and brew pubs who want to have a broad appeal, they need to be making beer that their customers want to drink. And I think that we're a restaurant first and foremost as a company, and we do wholesale beer a little bit, and we do a decent amount of retail beer over our own bars, and a tiny amount of distribution, mostly for charity and for marketing. But I'm not naive about that, and that means that people come to us first and foremost for food. Some people do come to us exclusively for beer. We're stoked about that. We want to make sure we have items that meet their needs, but we want to make sure we have items that meet everyone's needs. And our brand has made the decision to not sell major market beer because I think, and our founders, owners, and boards think that that's the right business decision for us, and we want to make sure that we're carefully and thoughtfully curating the list so that it not just meets the business needs, but also meets the needs of the customers. And that's working for us. I mean, so this year we leaned unsurprisingly into, clean filtered yellow lager beer and New England IPA, because as long as it says IPA on it, it's going to sell. And so what am I excited about for this year? I'm excited for us about the opportunity to consistently make beautiful beer, right? I think the Rotator Nation idea is finally starting to fade away. And as a journeyman crafts person, I care about that because it means we get to sharpen the saw a little bit, right? We get better and better at making the beers that our customers love. And that to me is exciting. At the same time, we're expanding our Beyond Beer program this year. So we're making more products that are legally beer, but land in a different bucket, right? So think seltzers and cocktail lookalikes and that kind of stuff. And that's been interesting. I think that, while those sectors aren't growing like they used to, they're still relevant to a lot of our customers, right? So right now, our Beyond Beer products represent about 5% of the beer portfolio that we sell inside of the building. And we do that for the same reasons that we make yellow lager beer. A large portion of our customers come in saying, hey, I enjoy and I'm looking forward to seltzer products or hard tea products or alcoholic soda pop, or even cocktails. I mean, we have a full bar, so we sell wine, spirits, and also, and those will continue to be relevant to our consuming public, and for the same reasons, right? Obviously we're more profitable when people buy our beer, and that's brand aligned for us. I mean, we are a brew pub, and we're unashamed and unabashed about that. So it's an interesting. I'm a little excited about stability, and especially as the market's changed so much in the last 3 years, and I'm also excited about some innovation that we got going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and let's dive into that part of the, that building that 5% of the alternate beverages, the alternate fermentations, things that you guys are looking forward to. Is it because of the styles and thought processes of a younger generation? Is that's what's driving it? Or is it coming towards the general consumer that might be our generation that is just changing drinking habits?
A little column A, a little column B, right? So part of this is about the better for you ideas around alcohol consumption, right? It's very interesting, and I'm going to segue for about 2 seconds and talk about some data that I saw Dr. Bart Watson from the Brewers Association present recently. And there's a lot of chicken little sky is falling in our industry. The world's going to upend, and it got more difficult in the last few years to do what we do, and so we should all run screaming from the industry. And what Bart said, and I consider him a friend, so I don't mind using his first name, but what Dr. Bart said was, hey, alcohol consumption's basically flat in America, right? I mean, the sectors are a little bit fighting over the same slice of the pie, but the bottom didn't just fall out, right? There's some softening in the growth specifically of craft beer. And I think we all know that the long arc of the last generation or so in the United States has been a slight but consistent reduction in the consumption of beer. But craft beer has not had that. Craft beer, this is the funny part. People are like, oh my God, first of all, sorry, I'm hopping around. I didn't mean to do that. But First of all, I'm old enough to have been in this industry in 1996, the first time the bottom quote fell out, right? When the Wall Street Journal famously and incorrectly announced the death of craft beer, right around the time of the first uh, IPOs. Rock Bottom went public, I think, somewhere in that range.
Right.
And of course, those of us who are in the Midwest know a lot about Rock Bottom, and we're interested to see that thing come together. And I think there's kind of a redo on that, right? Here we are. What are we? Almost 20 years later, 96, almost 30 years later.
30.
Jeez, John, we're getting old. Any case, what's old is new again, and that idea is interesting. So I caution people all the time. I'm like, we're not going to pivot off of the thing that made us specifically in our industry popular and relevant to customers. We need to be sensitive to the needs of emerging customers, right? I think we all kind of know Gen Z's drinking habits have shifted. They don't consume ethanol as much as our generation does or our parents' generation does. And some of that is, I think, situational. We'll see. I mean, they're definitely consuming non-beer, but altered state products.
Yep.
We all know about the growth of the marijuana industry. Delaware has legalized. There's not a mechanism for that yet, but we anticipate that's going to have some impact on our business. But for the most part, we're going to continue doing the things that we think have made us successful to this point and innovate smartly. So the seltzers represent something that we didn't make prior to last year, and we've got much better at it. And you nailed it, right? Some of it is about better for you, but a lot of it is about, hey, a substantial portion of our customers, 5% of our beer drinkers or 5% of our drinkers, we think, are saying, listen, these products are relevant to me. I buy them and drink them and use them in other places. And can you provide them for me? And my answer is absolutely. And we don't necessarily want to be selling somebody else's product in that bucket because we can make it. And we're very proud of the way we can make it. We don't mind selling other people's products, although we prefer not to because ours are better for us from a profit standpoint. And I'll give you a great example of a spot where I lean into another brewery's products is we are super stoked to offer Athletics non-alcoholic craft beer products to our customers. And we sell a couple cases a week at most of our locations to people who want to enjoy the flavor of beer, but for whatever reason are choosing not to consume ethanol. And we're super fired up about that product. I know those people, they're wonderful. Their flavors are awesome. We get great execution out of their products that are mail ordered and come to us. But we don't have the technology, the equipment to make non-alcoholic beer. So that's never going to be possible for us. The equipment to do that is pretty exceedingly expensive.
Right.
So it makes sense for us to buy those products. But if we can make seltzers, we're gonna. And because we're brew pubs, we also, I said, the arc of our long program for the year is difficult to shift, but it's not difficult for us to shift in individual pubs on the short term with things like new seltzer flavors, right? Yeah. Because we're making relatively small batches of these. We do pack them. We believe that the experience of having a seltzer or a tea in a sleek can or one of the small format cans is relevant to some of our customers, and it's kind of cool to walk around the yard of our backyard of one of our businesses full of people having a good time and be able to sip on a can of seltzer, Yeah. So that's kind of where we are with the portfolio and why we are with seltzer. I will tell you, we don't envision that it's going to become the majority of our sales and product. But again, our goal is to be relevant and have the right products that our customers want in the right place at the right time. And it's working,
Nice. Has the way you guys advertise changed at all, or thinking towards advertising or rebranding? I know you guys kind of did some of that. How is it going forward for you and being able to showcase, hey, this is what we have to bring in those type of consumers?
We cleaned up we cleaned up our branding, and this wasn't my project. This was our marketing director's project about 2 years ago. But for us, it was a relatively subtle tweak on what had originally been laid out for us by a really awesome Philadelphia artist named Paul Carpenter. Made our logo and did a lot of our early work. And then we've had teams of really creative people. I'm fortunate our brewery restaurant is part of a slightly larger hospitality group, and that means we've got really good support staff, including an awesome marketing and creative team that produces collateral for us. I'm spoiled here with that group because they do such great work. And mostly it was about aligning it and cleaning it up and making sure that our brand looked professional and looked the way our customers expected it to look. So I'm proud of that. Also, it helps us, again, while we can't pivot really quickly, they're excellent at saying, hey, if you want to release new products next year, Let us help you both with the research around what maybe they ought to be, although I think we have a pretty good idea from the brewery department about that. I'm always interested in more data. And also, how can we position the brand around that? So, I mean, we're lucky and spoiled. A lot of very small brewery businesses don't have that luxury. I call it a luxury. So, that to me is just great. If we can come up with an idea for a beer like Shark Party, and the marketing department lands this just killer label with, it's a shark with an inner tube, and if you saw it, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's cute. And that it resonates with another portion of our customers who are into the art, right? I mean, I love and appreciate all forms of art, not just beer. So for me, it's cool to see what that group comes up with to try to identify our individual brands. And I love that work. I wish I were more talented at it, but like I said, I just get to be the beneficiary of the hard work that group does.
Awesome. How about you kind of touched on it before, the fact that you guys don't do a lot of distribution. You are a brew pub group, so you're able to do a lot over the bar, which in this day and age, margins are so important that way. How key has that been? And have you guys kind of reeled back a little bit from that distribution aspect because of what has been going on, and seeing that it's much more profitable and kind of easier to control what you guys are doing with the beer and other drinks in-house?
You nailed it. I mean, I think everyone who runs a small brewery understands that the margins they don't work, right? I mean, a brew pub is never going to make money selling a wholesale beer, and if they do, it's because of some really unusual situation. And in most of the markets where we operate, distribution up until very recently was either required, well, it was required, right? And we have restaurants in South Carolina and in Delaware, and we're building in North Carolina. And in South Carolina, every drop of beer has to go through distribution, right? We can't directly distribute, and that also means a margin for the distributor. And I think we all kind of understand that incremental percentage margins for distributors have crept up a long way. When I started in this business, we were talking about margins in the low 20s, and now we're talking about margins for the distributor sometimes in the 40s, which is just untenable, right? The middle tier is going to make more money on that beer than a producer will ever make. And, there's a lot of talk about wholesale beer as marketing, but when there's 10,000 SKUs on the shelf, I mean, how much marketing are you really going to get out of that? In the places where we have to, we can't, in South Carolina, for instance, we can't donate beer to somebody without it going through distribution. So, we must work with the distributor, but, the best we're going to get putting wholesale beer into distribution is maybe $300 a US barrel, just to take a hammer to the big number. And over the bar, we're 3 to 5 times more profitable. And to your point, we can control the quality of our product more easily in that way. Also, a lot of what we do is difficult to communicate to customers who aren't in our space. We can tell the story about our beer and help people experience our products more easily inside the pub, So we still do a little bit of wholesale distribution, mostly to support our outbound efforts around charitable and community events. And we will continue to do that a little bit, but it's becoming a far less important portion of our program than any other thing we do.
Yeah. Well, and finally, you kind of touched on the fact that you guys are building in North Carolina, and being able to expand in that aspect. A lot of talk this year, which we have never talked about it, never heard anything about it, and it seems to be biting people in the butt a lot, is property. And it's leasing, or it's buying, owning yourself, working with someone, having landlords. There's a lot of breweries coming up on that 10-year anniversary that probably had a 10-year lease. And all of a sudden they're like, crap, we can't keep this sustainable. I think someone said 34 of the last 35 days, and this was a few weeks ago, they heard about a brewery either closing a location, closing completely, or having to, shut down some operation aspect. And this is including some cideries that I've talked to. It seems to be the topic that a lot of people weren't thinking about, that just happened to come up at the same time that everything else is happening. I mean, how important is it to have some sort of thought process going forward with property, and whether it's you're owning it yourself or working on better lease agreements? And I'm sure with brewing operations, you probably don't have a lot of full aspect of that, of what, you're not the one signing the contracts and stuff, but What's the talk about that for you guys?
Well, I am in the leadership group that discusses these issues. So, property's clutch, right? And rent is a huge portion of anybody's expense. I think there's a larger issue here, though. I mean, it's a two-part problem, right? The first is that while we are now talking about breweries closing, breweries have been opening and closing since the late 80s, since the late 70s, right? Well, New Albion's what, 79? And they're not around anymore. So they opened and they closed. Again, if we look at the economics of it, the bottom's not falling out of the industry. We're reaching the point where we're maturing as an industry, right? So there's still plenty of places opening, and along with that, there are places that are closing. And I think the reason is not one thing, right? I think the reason is all the things, and certainly property is a piece of that. But places that were better at running their business have already made a plan for that, right? Like, if you're coming up on your 10-year lease and you haven't for the last 3 years been planning about what you're going to do when that lease matures, shame on you, right? Like, we should be planning 3 to 5 years for our business, and we certainly are. And we own some of our property, we lease some of our property. I think it's just a toolbox, right? You have to put the tools in that meet your business's needs. And if you can find a spot that has responsible lease rates and a good landlord, because that's important, and maybe there's some tenant improvement money floating around for you there, where you're working is just a part of the equation. You know? And I would speculate that a lot of these places that we're seeing folding aren't just folding because their lease is maturing. They're folding because they were already struggling to make profit, right? Certainly a lot of new pressures since the pandemic. Raw goods have changed, distributors have consolidated, the industry has upended just a little bit about who's buying what, where, and when. And people who were on the bubble before all of those challenges popped certainly weren't going to make it, right? I'd say this company is not on the bubble, not good. We always want to be careful about being too busy breaking our own patting ourselves on the back. But, we try to be strategic and thorough about that planning and say, hey, what are we going to do? I'm sitting in our Lewis, Delaware location, and we actually own the dirt we sit on here. But we lease in a couple of our other spots, and we're pretty happy with those lease arrangements because we vetted the landlord carefully and made a long plan about how we're going to operate. So I don't think we're going to run into any issues in the foreseeable future around that. I mean, would we like overhead to be lower? Oh, heck yeah, always, right? Would we like raw goods to be cheaper? You better believe it, right? All of that would lead to more flow through profitability. But, we got to remember that at the end of the day, this is a pretty narrow margin business we're in, either hospitality or sometimes even narrower if you're just in production gear. And you got to mind the nickels and the dimes and make sure that you're being very careful about how your business covers its expenses to leave room for profit at the end of the day. I'm fortunate. I work with a really strong team of people who keep the culinary department tight and keep the finance department tight, keep our merchandise tight, so that there's room for us to operate in. Nobody wants to hear the conversation of, hey, we're going to have a shortfall on cash flow this month. What are we going to do about that? And, my finance team is very careful about that. And there's always an open dialogue and a conversation about it. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that even a brew pub might carry $60, $70, $100,000 worth of raw good inventory. And managing that is important. We use software and we spend quite a bit of admin time making sure that we're benchmarking good costs, keeping loss down, and making sure that there's flow through profit from us. And if every department pulls their weight and we plan and budget carefully and achieve our sales goals, then hopefully we won't have to worry about that. We're also coming up on a time when some people are going to move, right? The biggest problem with buying your own or owning your own property right now, I think there's the underlying issue of if you're buying property for your business, that's going to soak up a lot of your seed money. And what brewery opened who is flush with cash, right? I can't think of one. I work for a company that plans very carefully about its money. But if you're tight on cash flow and you got to put hundreds of thousands or even millions down to own your property, that can strangle your business coming out of the gate. But also it might pay off in the long run because the consistent appreciation of the commercial real estate has been roughly 6% throughout my entire lifetime. And if I could get 6% returns on my long money forever, I'd feel pretty good about that. So if you can pull it off, it's great, but it could hobble you. We would like to double the size of our organization in the foreseeable future. And if we buy all of the property that we want to open in, that's going to slow us down because you got to raise that money or you got to borrow that money. And at the end of the day, cash is oxygen. I have a very good friend who works as a CFO for another organization outside the industry, and he's like, most businesses don't close because they're not profitable. Businesses close because they run out of cash, right? I mean, the thing that actually catalyzes the door getting locked is you can't pay your staff or your taxes, right?
Right.
And then there's some people involved in that decision who aren't you, and and of course, none of those are issues for us, but that's kind of how I'm looking at it. The cost of money, we would love it to be cheaper, right? I mean, but the places that we own, we've purchased some time ago, so I feel like we're in a better shape. I don't know that for sure. I could ask the finance department, but I would be shocked if we weren't in a better shape on the property than people who are trying to buy now, right? Also, and this is another interesting discussion point that doesn't affect us, but sometimes buying can be a hedge about losing your lease later, right? But at the end of the day, it's just a bean count project, right? Does it make more sense to invest the money in the property or to invest it in the growth and marketing of the business? That's going to come down to each person's skill set and each business's prime ability to generate income and profit.
Right. And it's an important aspect that a lot of breweries, I think, that don't have that business acumen coming in, the home brewer wanting to open up in his local thing. That's, I think, the hardest part that a lot of people don't know coming in. This is what we need to do. Or if you've already opened your brewery, you need to start thinking about this. And like you said, that 3 to 5 year plan, making sure that you're actually thinking about, this is coming up and we need to start talking, internally with if we're leasing or what we want to do for the future, because I think that's where you see a lot of that trouble arise. And like you said, I mean, there's so many other factors that surround around that, but overall, it does sound like that's something that if someone hasn't thought about it, they should be thinking about it right exactly now.
When our industry is showing 10 to 20% year-over-year growth every year for almost 15 years, I think is the number. I mean, that's insanity, right? Like, you talk to somebody in the tire business and they're like, "Whoa, we grew 3% this year. That's amazing." And you're like, "What are you talking about? We're budgeted for 20% growth, right?" and I think that a bunch of people who weren't around in the 90s are starting to realize that 20% growth is not sustainable, right? That can't happen forever. Eventually you run out of places to grow. And I am proud of our industry about where we are on the percentage of the beer that gets sold in America. We're north of 10, and that's for BA numbers. If you count IRI numbers, it's even higher, right? If you're talking about what IRI craft is compared to small independent craft, and it's just highlighting the issue of it's not it's not show friends, it's show business, right? Like this is a business, and if you're not a savvy business person, or you don't have the skills to operate your business, even if you have the skills to make beautiful beer, you're not going to be sustainable or profitable in the current market environment. And I, for one, am not upset about that, right? It just means the people who can juggle the balls of production, customer satisfaction, and profitability are going to win. And I feel like that's appropriate. My politics are a little left to center, but I certainly think that we live in a capitalist environment, and the people who can get it done should win. Right. So I think it's healthy to see some calling of places on the bubble. Now, does that mean some friends of ours who make really delicious beer may not get to continue to operate for-profit businesses? That's a bummer, right? We hate that.
Yep.
But I don't think it's terribly unhealthy. And while the current Gen Z group may have shifted their consuming patterns for alcohol a little bit, everything's a cycle, right?
Yep.
We don't drink the beer our dad drank until we drink the beer our dad drank, ? Right? All of a sudden, I'm seeing Gen Z kids running around with cans of Carling Black Label, and I'm like, oh, that makes my heart happy.
That's awesome. Yeah, I just had a Carling like last week with my dad, of all things. So
you might be old enough to remember the ad campaigns, right? Hey, Mabel, Black Label. I grew up in the upper Midwest, right?
Yep, exactly.
The Canadian beers bleed across the border.
Absolutely. Well, Larry, I appreciate you peering into the future with us on this, and I appreciate the insights and the expert outlook. And so, Larry, thanks so much.
As always, looking forward to reading what you guys put out.
Don't forget, you can always check on brewermag.com. You can also see us on YouTube and listen to us on Spotify. And don't forget daily updates on Facebook, Instagram, and X. I'm Executive Editor Jon Sicotte for brewermagazine.com.